Now, let us learn how to calculate the free float. We are presented with this information. If you recall, this information was the first information presented to us for our simple network diagram. So I'm not going to repeat the process of drawing a network diagram. The PDM notation has an additional information indicated below as free float FF. And we also recall that float is a result of late start minus early start, or late finish minus earliest finish. So let's draw the precedent diagram. A, B, C, D, E, and F with the relationships and all the values as indicated. The critical path as determined was A, B, D, and F. And the floats along A, B, D, and F are 0. So that is the critical path, and the non-critical path, which is C and E, have floats as 3 for C and 3 for E. So now let's determine the free float of activity A. We'll have the formula for free float as the early start, that is minimum of succeeding activity, minus the early start of the current activity minus the duration of that activity. In other words, the early for the free float for activity A is the minimum of the succeeding activities of either B or C. So in this case, the minimum succeeding activities are 2. So 2, which is B of B or C, minus 0, which is the early start of A, minus 2, which is the duration of A, and that will give us 0. Then the free float again can be calculated as the earliest start of the next activity minus the earliest finish of the current activity. So in this case, if we are trying to find a free float for A, the earliest start of the next activity is either 2 for B or 2 for C, and that would have the early finish of the current activity being 2, so that should give us 0. So let's commence the calculation. Using the first formula, we have 2, which is the early start of B or C, which is 2, minus 0, which is the early start of A, minus the duration, giving us 0. And the second formula also says the early start of the next activity, which is 2 for B, minus the early finish, 2 for A, and that gives us 0. Let's look at activity C. The early start of the succeeding activity, which is 4, minus the early start of activity C, which is 2, minus the duration of C, which is 2, giving us 0. And using the second formula, it will be 4 minus 4, and that is also 0. For activity E, we take the early start of the succeeding activity F, which is 10, minus the early start of activity E, 4, minus the duration 3, giving us 3. And using the second formula, 10 minus 7, which is the early start of the next activity, minus the early finish of the current activity, giving us the same answer. Activity B, we take the early start of the succeeding activity 5 minus the early start of the current activity 2 minus its duration 3, giving us 0. Using the second formula, it is the early start of the succeeding activity minus the early finish of the succeeding activity, which is 5 minus 5. Now let's look at activity D. The succeeding activity is F with an early start of 10 minus the early start of D 5 minus the duration 5, giving us 0. And the second formula is the early start of the next activity, which is 10, minus the early finish of the current activity, which is also 10. And this also gives us 0. Now, for the last activity, which is F, it should be noted that the free float is less or equal to the total float. Activity F doesn't have any succeeding activity. So the free float on that activity will be equal to the total float of that activity. So this is our result, and this is how our floats, the free floats and the total floats are calculated.